guys, it's Rachel here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my April mid-month wrap-up, and today I have 7 books to talk about, so I think I'm reading just a little bit more books than I read in March. And I don't have much else to say, so without further ado, let's just get into it. The first book I finished in the month of April is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. For those of you that are interested, this is a gorgeous edition by Barnes & Noble, and there's beautiful gold edges, and actually this bind-up contains not only Little Women, but the 2 sequels that Louisa May Alcott wrote, which are Little Men and Jo's Boys. I have not read those 2 books yet, but I plan to at some point in the future. Okay, I'm gonna stop holding this book because it's very, very heavy. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what this book is about before I go into my review. For those of you who may not know, this is of course an American classic, so I'm sure a lot of you probably read this during your childhood or know about the plot. So this story centers around 4 sisters. There is Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, and this essentially follows their childhood into adulthood. The first section of the book definitely takes place during the Civil War, and I think as we go on through the years, the Civil War is now over as we go into the sisters' adulthood. I talked about this book a lot in my April TBR video because there's a very specific reason why I read it. For those of you who may not know, Little Women has been adapted into not only quite a few movies, but it has also been adapted into a mini-series that I believe BBC and PBS produced, and that came out last year, and that is a phenomenal mini-series. Definitely recommend it. But it was also adapted into a musical in 2005 and into an opera in 1998. And the opera has quickly become one of my all-time favorites. For those of you who may not know, I am an opera singer. That is what I am pursuing a career in. And I am going to be singing the role of Jo March this coming summer. And in both the opera and the musical, Jo is definitely the main character, whereas in the book, it's definitely more balanced between the 4 sisters as to like who gets the most like screen time. So yeah, because I'm doing the opera, I've actually done the opera twice before, but I've never actually finished the book. And so because I am singing this role again, I decided that I really needed to finish this book once and for all. And so I went ahead and listened to the audiobook, and I think that that is a phenomenal way to take in this story. I think if you are the kind of person that is intimidated by classics, I know that I am, listening to them on audiobooks is a great way to take them in because you get to just sit back and listen to someone tell you the story. So this book is definitely broken up into 2 halves of one complete story. So the first part is the 4 sisters really as children and teenagers, and that section of the book is very episodic, where every chapter is a different kind of little story about what each sister is going through or things like that. I feel like the first section also moves along a bit faster and is just more interesting, I think. The second half definitely focuses more on these 4 sisters as adults. It starts out pretty much with Meg getting married to Brooke. Meg is the oldest of the 4 sisters, and it goes on from there. That section for me personally was a bit repetitive. It just wasn't as interesting to me. I really enjoyed it. I totally see why this is an American classic, but because I didn't love the second section as much, I did lower my rating a bit, and I wholeheartedly recommend at least the first section of the book for children of all ages. I think it is a great story to kind of read to your children before they go to sleep at night, and the second section feels a lot more adult. I would say that it's probably not going to be interesting to readers until they become at least teenagers. I could definitely see why this book was initially published in 2 separate volumes as opposed to one big book. So yeah, it definitely deserves to be an American classic. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I want to talk about is Starry Eyes by Jenn Bennett. This is a YA contemporary romance, and this book centers around Zori and Lennon, who were once best friends and even started dating each other, but something happened to where basically they no longer speak to each other and they kind of despise each other. So this is definitely a hate to love trope, which is one of my favorite tropes. So if you enjoy that as well, you will really like this book. So basically what happens is that Zori and Lennon get stuck in the woods together, and so that's kind of how they start mending their relationship. I really loved this book. I really loved not only Zori and Lennon and their chemistry, but also Lennon's parents and Zori's stepmom. I just thought they were such great characters and they just added so much to the story. I just loved how organically Zori and Lennon went from hating each other to loving each other. It just felt very realistic and it was just very enjoyable to read, honestly. I also really like that there are some pretty messy things going on in both Zori and Lennon's life that don't necessarily get wrapped up in a neat little bow by the end of the book. It just felt very realistic and I absolutely loved the atmosphere of this book. Now, I'm not someone who enjoys camping, but the way that this book was written made me want to go camping. So I definitely recommend this book. If you love YA romance, definitely check out Jenn Bennett. I definitely plan on reading some of her other books in the future, and I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book I want to talk about is Pride by E.B. Zeboy. I actually listened to this on audiobook, and it is narrated by the incredible Elizabeth Acevedo, who is the author of The Poet X that I read last year and absolutely loved. So this is a book that is a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. Now, I have never read that book nor seen the movie, so I'm not going to really talk about like a comparison between the two. I'm just going to talk about this story as it is. So this centers around Zori Benitez. I believe she lives in Brooklyn and she's living in a neighborhood that is rapidly gentrifying. And so one day she discovers that this family called the Darcys is moving in across the street from her in this beautiful mansion. And this is another story that is a hate to love trope, but that is definitely coming from the source material as much as I know of Pride and Prejudice. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I will say a few negatives before I get to the positives. I think overall this book was a little bit too short. It was only a 6-hour audiobook and there just wasn't enough time to really develop these characters. I think Zeboy did a good job of developing them as much as she could in just a 6-hour audiobook, but I definitely think that this book could have used more substance overall. And I just felt like the hate to love relationship between Zori and Darius was a bit rushed as well. It just kind of felt kind of sudden to me that all of a sudden Zori really liked him. But overall, I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. I definitely recommend the audiobook because Elizabeth Acevedo is just incredible at narrating. I think she's perfect for these kind of books. I also loved how Zeboy explored these issues from the original source material, but putting them into 2019. I just thought it worked so well. It just shows that that kind of story is just so timeless. The next book that I want to talk about is The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth. This is an arc that I got off of NetGalley. So this is an adult mystery slash thriller, and the plot centers around Lucy, who at the very beginning of the book has just found out that her mother-in-law has died. They're not sure whether this is a suicide or homicide, and the plot basically centers around Lucy and her mother-in-law, whose name is Diana, and how their very weird and bizarre relationship has developed over the years since they first met. At first, you're kind of led to believe that Lucy is the one who might have murdered Diana, but the story goes in a very different direction from that. I overall really enjoyed this book. I found it to be very intriguing. I really liked the dual perspective, but also the time jumps throughout. Not only do we get a lot of information as to the relationship between Lucy and Diana, but we also get Diana's complete backstory as to who she was as a younger woman and how that plays into who she is today. There are some really interesting side characters such as Lucy's husband and Lucy's sister-in-law. And yeah, if you enjoy really intriguing thriller mystery novels, I would definitely recommend this one. I don't think it's being published until either the end of this month or next month, but definitely be on the lookout for this one. And I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I want to talk about is Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. This is the 3rd book in the Grisha trilogy, or the Shadow and Bone trilogy. The reason why I wanted to read this series is because I've really been interested in reading the Six of Crows duology, but I've heard from several people that it is to your benefit to read this trilogy first. You get a really good idea of what this world is, because Netflix is developing a series centering around both this trilogy and the Six of Crows duology. I wanted to read all of the books before watching that. So I am very sad to say that I was pretty disappointed by this book. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. I am going to say a couple of positive things. I really loved the final battle scene. I thought that it was the perfect way to end this trilogy. I know that a lot of people hate the way that this series ends, but I think it just makes so much sense for these characters and for this world. And honestly, it did give me a few feels, but unfortunately that is where the positives end for this book. Mainly my problem with this is that it was so freaking boring. Oh my goodness. I had to force myself to pick up this book quite a few times while reading this. There were only a few times throughout where I was actually really interested in what was happening and I thought that things were moving at a good pace. But for the most part, I just felt like it was a lot of telling and not showing overall. And there were a lot of long stretches of this book where there were little to no dialogue and the characters were just going on this long, boring journey. And I just didn't really care, honestly. Plus, Nikolai and the Darkling are not really involved in this book. So that is very disappointing because those two characters definitely help make this series so interesting in my opinion. So when you take them out of the storyline, things just get really boring. Also, I had a huge problem with the fact that Bardugo introduces so many secondary characters, especially in this book, but she introduces some in Siege and Storm, which is the second book. And I feel like she doesn't develop them at all, and so I just don't care about them at all. And when I'm reading this book, I feel like I'm just reading names off of a page. I have like no association with these characters. I just don't care. But yeah, I don't know if I would recommend this trilogy, unfortunately. I really loved the first book, Shadow and Bone. I thought it was a solid 4-star book. Siege and Storm was okay. I think I gave it like 3 or 3.5 stars. That one was a little boring, but it was okay. But this book was overall just so disappointing and so boring that I just don't know if I would recommend it. I really love the Darkling and Nikolai. Those two characters go a long way for making this series interesting. And I like Alina and Mao. I don't hate them. I don't love them. I mean, they're okay, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm very conflicted about this trilogy, as you can tell. And I'm just very sad to say that I really did not enjoy this final book. Next book that I want to talk about is Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire. This is the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series. So far there are 4 books in this series. So at first I was super excited about this installment when I read a brief synopsis and found out that this book centers around characters from the first installment. I thought at first that this was going to be another prequel story like Down Among the Sticks and Bones was, and that I thought it was going to center around a character from the first installment, but them in the past when they were in a fantasy world, but it actually centers in the present and actually kind of the future of the characters from the first book. It kind of gets confusing throughout, but that's kind of the best way to summarize it. Overall, I liked this story. I wasn't blown away by it, unfortunately. I just am not convinced that this story needed to happen, honestly. To me, it didn't really add all that much to this world and to these characters. It was really interesting to explore another fantasy world. In this book, we explore confection, as you can tell from the title, Beneath the Sugar Sky, which is a world basically where everything is made of baked goods and everything is nonsense, essentially. But yeah, just wasn't blown away by this book. I did appreciate that the main character was plus sized. Felt like we got a really good perspective from her as to what it is like to grow up being plus sized. And I liked that we checked in with a character from the first book who found her door and went back to her fantasy world. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. But other than that, I really don't have much to say. I think I settled on giving this 3 stars. And the very last book that I want to talk about in this video is I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. This is the first book of hers that I have ever read. I know I seriously need to read Radio Silence. It just has not gotten picked out of my TBR jar yet. So this book centers around Angel, who's actually a Muslim character. I loved that Alice Oseman featured not only a Muslim character, but the other main character, whose name is Jimmy, is actually trans. I just think it's wonderful that Alice Oseman featured 2 main characters from backgrounds that we don't normally see in YA. So basically, this centers around Angel, who is obsessed with this boy band called The Ark, and Jimmy is a member of that boy band. And so at first, I thought this was going to be a romance where Angel and Jimmy would meet, and we would kind of see their relationship change because he's famous and she's not, and how that would work and all of that stuff. But unfortunately, this is not a romance, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I am going to start with the negatives for this one because I only have one major thing to say. I think that the ending could have been done a bit better. For me personally, I feel like there was no real resolution for either of these main characters. I feel like the book just kind of ended, and that's unfortunate because I really wanted to see more of the aftermath of events that happened towards the end. But other than that, I really enjoyed this book. For one thing, I loved the anxiety rep in this. Jimmy, who is trans, he has anxiety, also has very extreme anxiety, and so you see what goes on through his mind when he has panic attacks. I just think this is really good rep for people who also have really bad anxiety. I also think that this book does a wonderful job of discussing fandom culture, giving that Angel and her friends are huge fans of this boy band. And I think that Alice Oseman also did a great job of covering a lot of other different issues that teens all over the world go through. So I definitely recommend this book, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And that's going to be it for this video, you guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you would also consider subscribing, and don't forget to push that notification bell button below so that you will be notified every time I upload. See you guys in the next video. Bye!